Hi everyone, hope everyone's doing well. Yesterday I went to the Toronto Yu-Gi-Oh! Regionals event, and even though I failed to make the top 8 cut, I did manage to end the event with the X2 record, meaning that of the 9 rounds I played, I won 7 games and lost 2 games. Overall, this was a new record for me in terms of the most amount of wins I ever got from any regionals ever. And even though I didn't make the top cut, I do feel that this means that I am improving as a competitive Yu-Gi-Oh player. And today I'm just here to do my deck profile that I used during the event, which, as you can see, is my updated ABC Adventurer Therion deck. So without further ado, let's begin. So previously, in all my previous deck profiles, I've usually started with monsters, then spells, then traps. But today, I'm going to do things a little bit differently. I'm going to go through the different engines of this deck, what they overall contribute to the strategy, and why it's important and why it's such a huge improvement to this particular deck now that we have these engines compared to previously before when we did it. So let's start off with the core of the deck that has always been the heart and soul of this deck since the very beginning when it first came out in 2016. We run 2 A Assault Cores, 2 B Buster Drakes, and 2 C Crush Wyverns. I was previously already running 2 Assault Core and 2 Crush Wyvern, so I'm not going to explain why I run 2 and not 3. However, for Buster Drake's case, this was actually a recent modification. So the reason why I now run 2 Buster Drakes because instead of 3 is actually because now that I have less targets to search. And I really don't need like a 3rd Buster Drake to search out the additional target. And overall, I feel that 2 Buster Drakes is just fine, especially if it gets the rest of the combos rolling. Buster Drake, you could play at 3 if you really wanted to, but I find that this deck actually works better if you cut down the main ABC cards core and so that it can make room for the other engines in this deck. Anyways, moving on. Next up, obviously, you have the mandatory 1 Union driver. I found that yesterday I drew this card substantially less often compared to when I would draw it on platforms such as Dueling Book, for instance. Like when I draw it on Dueling Book, it seems I'm getting this around once every 2 duels to once every 3 duels. So if I play a best 2 of 3 match, it's almost guaranteed that I'm going to be drawing driver in my opening hand at least once on Dueling Book. However, yesterday at Regionals, I drew this card a grand total of 1 time in the entire 9 rounds in my opening hand. And almost every other time, or just about every other time, I never opened this card. And from a statistical perspective, if you run a 40 card deck and you run 1 Union driver and you draw 5 cards going first, then statistically, there's a 1 in 8 chance that one of your opening hands will contain a Union driver. However, I found that yesterday, like after playing 9 matches and over for a grand total of over 20 something games played, I only ended up drawing this card in my opening hand once out of those 20 something games. So it seems the probability was substantially lower. So I was actually previously debating on whether or not to run a 2nd driver because Union Hanger, the main field spell of this deck, can only equip driver out of the deck and cannot equip it out of the hand. So this way, even if I draw driver, one of the drivers, essentially I know I would at least have a 2nd one in the deck that I can still use Union Hanger to equip. But after some careful debate, I decided no, I think 1 driver is good enough. Because if you do draw driver, it's basically playing on a 4 card hand, even if you know that you still have a 2nd driver in the deck to be equipped with. So yes, 1 Union driver. Next up, one of the best field spells in the game right now, Union Hanger. This card is an automatic +1 upon activation. So in that regard, it makes it similar to cards like Magical Meltdown. But in addition, when you summon one of your ABC pieces to the field, you can use a field spell to target this piece. Yes, the effect does target. and you can basically equip one of your other pieces to like a Light Machine Union monsters to it with a different name. And in this case, most of the time, if you're just getting off with your combo, you equip Union Driver. So why do you equip Union Driver instead of, say, going directly to a Crush Wyvern or a Buster Drake? Well, the answer is that if you equip the Union Hanger itself, it has a restriction that if you equip a monster, equip something to this monster by its effect, basically the equipped card cannot summon itself directly this same turn. However, if you equip Union Driver, you can use Union Driver's effect to banish it and equip one of your other pieces from the deck. And now this piece is live. You actually are able to summon it. So this basically makes it so that your Union Driver, if you have a Union Driver in your deck, this means your Hanger not only is a field spell that gives you a +1, it basically is a 1 card turns into 2 monsters on the field off of just 1 activation and your normal summon. So yes, always max out on Hanger because this card is basically what makes this deck playable. Next up, we have 2 Unauthorized Reactivation. I was previously running 3 copies of this thing, but recently decided to cut it down to 2. Well, 1 to make room for other engines to be added to this deck, and 2 because with Assault Core, Buster Drake, and Crush Wyvern all cut down to 2 copies each, you really don't need the 3rd copy. Not to mention, this thing is a hard once per turn, so if you open multiple, that doesn't really benefit you. It doesn't really give you a an additional extension if you have multiple copies. That said, this thing is a quick play, and because your ABC pieces inherently offer the equipped monsters protections from monster effects in the case of Assault Core, spell card effects in the case of Buster Drake, and trap card effects in the case of Crush Wyvern, Unauthorized Reactivation is basically one of those cards that can double as a Forbidden Lance type of effect while also being a combo extender. So this is a must-have. You must run at least 2 copies. So that rounds up the ABC cards in this deck. As you can see, the core ABC cards is actually a very small engine. But let's go to what makes this deck makes this deck really good in terms of one of the 2 new engines that came out in the last 6 months. Let's start with the Ethereum Engine. So you run 3 Therion King Regulus and 3 Therion Disc Colosseums. The Ethereum King Regulus, I will compare this card to something like an Immortal Phoenix Gearfried in the case of in the sense that it does something similar for ABCs as Gearfried does for the Infernoble Knights. Like Immortal Phoenix Gearfried, Ethereum King Regulus has a very easy summoning condition, and it has an effect negation. It has an effect negation ability while it's on the field. The difference between this and Gearfried, and why I think King Regulus is actually a bit better, is that it's a summoning condition, is an inherent +1, and it can actually be seen as a monster reborn. So why is this the case? Because when Ethereum King Regulus is in your hand, you can activate this effect, targeting one of your ABC pieces in the graveyard. You summon the King Regulus and equip the targeted ABC piece to it. So essentially, since a Assault Core, let's say you equip a Assault Core. Since a Assault Core is a Union monster equipped to another monster, you can activate the Union monster's effect and special summon it. So now not only do you have King Regulus on the field acting as an Omni Negate, but now you have an a Assault Core on the field as well. And this is actually why this deck no longer runs cards like Heavy Mech Support Armor. Anything that Support Armor can do, King Regulus can do better. And there's nothing that Heavy Mech Support Armor can do that King Regulus cannot also do as well. So in order to search for the King Regulus, we actually run 3 Therion Disc Colosseums. About 4 years ago, I made a video listing all of the best field spells in the game at the time. And in the video, I had mentioned how good cards like Magical Meltdown and Union Hanger are. But I would say Therion Disc Colosseum would rival all of those field spells. For one, when it's also one of those field spells that gives you a free search on activation. In this case, it searches the King Regulus directly. And for the record, this is something that cards like Immortal Phoenix Gearfried, by comparison, don't even have. Second of all, it actually gives you a once per turn like protection from battle if any of your monsters would be disrupted by battle, whether they're Therion monsters or like any other monster. You can send one Therion card from your deck to the graveyard and then to protect that monster. So in this case, since it's a Therion card, you can send both the field spell or like the King Regulus itself. And the third effect actually complements the second effect, is that if a monster is destroyed by battle, whether it's your monster or your opponent's monster, you can take one of your Therion monsters in your graveyard and add it back to your hand. This means that if you have an A Assault Core on the field with the Colosseum active, you can actually say, if your opponent attacks your Assault Core, you can say, okay, I'll use this Colosseum's effect to send the King Regulus to the graveyard. And then they say, okay, I'll attack your Assault Core again with another monster. Then you say, okay, your Assault Core dies, activate Colosseum's second effect, adding the King Regulus back to your hand. And now next turn, when you summon Regulus, you can equip the Assault Core and then summon the Assault Core, and basically you just got all your monsters like back from the graveyard. A free indirect search as well as a reborn, essentially. So that covers it for the Ethereum's engine. Now let's look at the second amazing engine we got to complement our ABC deck. Now, starting off, the Adventure package, we run 2 Water Enchantress, the obvious 1 Griffin Rider, the 2 Rite of Eremisir that the Water Enchantress can search for. One thing I mentioned is that Water Enchantress, it doesn't just search the Rite of Eremisir from the deck, it can actually search this card from the graveyard as well. So let's say hypothetically you already played both of Rite of Eremisir, but you haven't used either Water Enchantress. If you top deck a Water Enchantress, you can actually banish it and get Rite of Eremisir from your graveyard back to your hand. So that I found that was actually pretty cool concept as well. The Griffin Rider is basically the second Omni Negate you have in this deck, aside from the King Regulus. But a Griffin Rider, the difference is that King Regulus, because it tributes itself for cost, that means if your opponent has something like a skill drain face up, then King Regulus can still negate your opponent's effects even under a skill drain. However, Griffin Rider cannot, and it has to shuffle itself back to the deck, not as a cost, but as part of the effect. So that means if you activate Griffin Rider's effect, now your opponent has an opportunity to use Ghost Ogre to pop the Griffin Rider and deny you your negation. But in addition to Griffin Rider, we also have 1 Fateful Adventure that can search for either Griffin Rider or the 2 Water Enchantress. And one other card that the Fateful Adventure can search for is the Equip Spell Dracoback the Rideable Dragon. This Equip Spell is like a once per turn free compulsory evacuation device. And the best part about this is that once per turn, if it dies and is sent to the graveyard, you can use it and automatically re-equip to a token that is summoned by Rite of Eremisir, the Adventure token. And like I know like some of you might think like, oh yeah, but Fateful Adventure and Dracoback there are complete bricks, but that's actually not completely true. Let's say if you open Fateful Adventure and Dracoback in your hand and you did not open any of these, you can actually activate Fateful Adventure, activate its effect to search hypothetically your Water Enchantress of the Temple, and then discard the Water Enchantress directly to the graveyard. You can now banish the Water Enchantress and add Rite of Eremisir to hand. You can play the Eremisir, and you can immediately summon out, let's say, your Adventurer token, and then you can equip this equip spell to it, and then activate the equip spell and bounce one of your opponent's cards. So even if you draw the Fateful Adventure, that's not necessarily a brick. Or better yet, if let's say hypothetically you open the Griffin Rider and the Fateful Adventure instead, you can play the Fateful Adventure again, search for the Water Enchantress, which now you have in your hand, and now you can discard the Water Enchantress to the graveyard, banish the Water Enchantress, searching you the Eremisir, play the Eremisir token, in order to play the Rite of Eremisir in order to summon the token. Since a monster has now been summoned, you will automatically equip Dracoback to this from your deck, and now you can summon the Griffin Rider automatically. And this basically gives you an Omni Negate on board. And one thing that happened that was really funny yesterday, Griffin Rider's effect to summon itself from the hand is actually a quick effect. You don't necessarily have to summon it during your turn, immediately on. You can actually choose to hold it in your hand. So this way, if your opponent has something like a Dark Ruler No More, if they Dark Ruler No More your entire field, you can say, okay, after Dark Ruler No More resolves, I summon Griffin Rider from my hand, and I still have at least one negation on the field. And in addition, if I found that a lot of people, they don't know that Griffin Rider's effect to summon itself is a quick effect. So if it's a mirror match, if it's a mirror adventurer, if it's an adventure mirror, and your opponent uses something like their Draco back to bounce a Griffin back to your hand, you can just let that through. You don't have to negate the Draco back. Just take it, take this to your hand, and then like when they're about to make their next move, you activate Griffin Rider in hand and summon it to the field again. So this is actually a neat little trick I learned yesterday at regionals that you could do. So anyway, that's it for the Adventurer package as well. Now let's take a look at the rest of the main deck cards. For hand traps, I still have the 3 Ash Blossoms. I say it was one of the Ash Blossom these days. It's not as powerful as it was maybe like a few years back when 1 Ash Blossom can literally end your turn. These days, a lot of decks can play through 1 Ash, but it still slows them down somewhat, especially if they're trying to go for their full combo. Now they might only be able to go for a partial combo. So if you can say, if you Ash them, then this weakens their field enough such that let's say their full combo has like 4 disruptions. But if you Ash them, then their partial combo can only have 2 disruptions. That means you just reduce the number of disruptions you have to play through on your next turn by 2 off of 1 card. I think that's a good trade-off. And following up with the 2 more hand traps, 2 imperms, because again, like this is one of those cards that, for instance, your opponent activates something like Branded Opening in the standby phase and summons out a Looper, and the Looper's effect immediately triggers to search. Since it's still the standby phase at that point, you cannot use like Effect Veiler to negate the Looper, but you can use Infinite Impermanence to negate it. This is why, like, I feel like as time passed after Infinite Impermanence was first released, we are starting to see the areas more clearly where Infinite Impermanence is indeed superior to something like Effect Veiler. But that's it for the 5 hand traps of this deck. Now the rest of the cards, obviously 1 Terraforming, because you run 6 field spells in this deck, and like all 6 of those cards are something you want to get to as early as possible. 1 Set Rotation. If you need your Union Hanger, just give your opponent your Disc Coliseum. Although, as a side warning, because ABCs are not the only deck that can run Ethereum Engine in this current format, if you use Set Rotation, make sure that to either get rid of the Disc Coliseum or whatever field spell you give your opponent, lest they be able to use it as well and use it against you in a counterattack. 1 Instant Fusion. Instant Fusion is actually really good because apparently there's actually 2 monsters you can summon depending on whether you can want to go first or second. The first is Millenniumized Restrict for going first. The second is Thousandized Restrict for going second. So basically, Millenniumized Restrict, it has a similar effect as something like Called by the Grave, where it can target any monster in your opponent's field or graveyard, and then equip it to this card. So this means that if you use Instant Fusion to Millenniumized Restrict as your opening move, if your opponent activates something like Ash Blossom later on while you're trying to combo off, you can use Millenniumized Restrict to equip the Ash Blossom to itself and negate its effect, and you still get its combo off. Now, this isn't 100% foolproof, but it does make it such that your opponent would need like 2 negations just to stop one of your like combo plays. And I think that in itself forces them into a really tough situation. Like, do they want to waste like 2 cards in their hand just to stop you from playing 1 card, for instance? Now, going second, okay, your opponent has an established board with maybe like several negations and disruptions. If you play Instant Fusion, summon the Millenniumized Restrict, and let's say one of their monsters says, oh, it can't be destroyed by card effects, Too bad. If Thousand Eyes Restrict, it doesn't say destroy. It targets a monster and equips it to it. So basically that's just a one card free removal in a way. So yes, Instant Fusion in a way, it's like going first, it's a hand trap blocker similar to Call by the Grave. Going second, it's non destruction removal. Following up, we have 2 more Pot of Prosperities. Because it's always good to maybe dig up to 6 cards deeper in your deck and to find your combo pieces. It's really important for you to get your combo pieces like Union Hanger and whatnot early on so you can start your combo. If you are not able to get it early on, you have to use these cards. And I would say if you have to banish 6 cards from your extra deck just to get that combo off, I would say it's worth it. It's 100% worth it. 1 Foolish Burial. Now, like previously, like this card was basically being used to find the missing piece. If you have like 2 of your 3 ABC pieces, you use this to dump the 3rd piece to the graveyard. But now, in addition to that, you can also use it to dump Water Enchantress to the graveyard and then banish it from the graveyard to search out your Rite of Aramesir to your hand. So now this Foolish Burial has a double use. And the funny thing that happened yesterday is that if I open the Rite of Aramesir and the Foolish Burial, instead of playing the Rite of Aramesir immediately, I would actually play the Foolish Burial first, dumping the Water Enchantress to the graveyard, and then I would banish the Water Enchantress, attempting to search a second copy of Rite of Aramesir. Now, a lot of the time when I did that, my opponent would actually immediately just immediately drop an Ash Blossom on this Water Enchantress effect, immediately negating its effect and preventing me from searching. At that point, that may have seemed like the right move, but then when I play the Rite of Aramesir from my hand, basically I'm still able to get out the full Adventurer combo altogether. So yes, now Foolish Burial has this dual utility in a way. And the aforementioned Call by the Grave, because again, like hand traps are never fun to play against if you are going first. And finally, we have 3 Forbidden Droplets. I was heavily debating between this card and Dark Ruler No More, but ultimately I decided to main deck Droplet and side deck Dark Ruler No More. The reason why I chose Droplet in the main deck is because it can also be used to, it's because it's a quick play, so it's good going first and second. And also you can force a chain block in the middle of a chain by using a Droplet and maybe sacrificing one of your ABC pieces. And then you can get your ABC pieces searching effect off as well. So yes, Droplet is really good in this deck. So now let's move on to the extra deck. Aside from the aforementioned Thousand Eyes and Millennium Eyes Restrict, you obviously have to run 3 copies of ABC Dragon Buster. This one is self-explanatory. This is the boss monster of this deck, and I would say objectively, I know like you guys are probably sick and tired of hearing the comparisons, and I promise this will be the last one, but I feel ABC Dragon Buster objectively is no worse of a card than something like Mirror Jade Ice Blade Dragon. Like both of them have a quick effect that lets them banish something the opponent controls, but Mirror Jade, it can only banish monsters. Dragon Busters, it can banish any card. And also, I get that Mirror Jade, if it dies or leaves the field because of an opponent's card, it gives the opponent a board wipe at the end phase. And that's pretty good. But then the thing is, since it happens at the end phase, that means your opponent still has that window of opportunity to go to their battle phase and finish you off right then and there. So the Mirror Jade effect during the end phase is kind of irrelevant. Whereas Dragon Buster, it can actually tribute itself, tag itself out, and actually summon back like your banished 3 ABC pieces. If I can just find that real quick. It can actually tag itself out and summon 3 ABC pieces to your field. And this way, now you have 3 more monsters. They just expended all their resources to try to get rid of Dragon Buster. But now you have your 3 piece. They still have 3 more monsters to get rid of. And if they finally get rid of all 3 of these, all 3 of A, B, and C are floaters. A, Assault Core will recycle something from graveyard to hand. B, Buster Drake will search something from deck to the hand. And C, Crush Wyvern, in turn, will basically take whatever you searched or recycle and summon them back onto the field. Basically, further creating kind of like a chump blocking brick that your opponent just has to like brute force their way through. So following up, I run one Bagoska, the Terribly Tired Tapir. This card actually came up a few times yesterday. I believe I was playing against Eldritch and also Flonderies, and I think the Bagoska, that was actually really useful against decks like Flonderies, for instance, because if you put it in defense mode, then basically it's kind of acts as a floodgate that, in a way, it prevents the opponent's monsters from basically, like it forces all of the birds to switch to defense mode, and basically if they're in defense mode, their effects are automatically negated. And the following turn, I will switch this to attack mode and maybe attack something. And then during main phase 2, summon AA Zeus on top of it. So the AA Zeus is really good because its effect is a quick effect and it's not a once per turn. Meaning that if you have, let's say, multiple monsters stacked underneath it. Let's say if you have like 4 cards stacked underneath it, you can say, okay, I activate Zeus's effect to detach 2 to send everything else to the graveyard. Your opponent might, at this point, respond with something like, oh, I activate Infinite Impermanence to negate the A Zeus, and you just respond, oh, I chain Zeus's effect, Chain Link 3 on top of that as well, activate again to detach 2 more, and still send everything else to the graveyard. So that's actually a really nice thing you can do with A Zeus. Although, realistically, you need at least 4 material on Zeus in order to even attempt that. And that's never easy to get, but if you are able to get it to that level, well, just remember that 1 imperm doesn't stop the Zeus. My Underworld Goddess of the Closed World, this thing had actually helped me win multiple duels because I just link summon away my opponent's best monster. And the thing is, this thing is not an effect. So even if your opponent's monster says this card's unaffected by your opponent's card effects, doesn't matter. Underworld Goddess's effect works in a similar way as like a kaiju. And just as you are able to kaiju over an opponent's monster that is unaffected, like you can also like link away your opponent's monster with Underworld Goddess. However, if the effect of your opponent's monster says something like, it doesn't say it's unaffected, but it says it cannot be used as link material, then Underworld Goddess cannot link it away, unfortunately. But regardless, this thing has the effect that prevents reborning from the graveyard. Also, when it's summoned, it basically like a mass Dark Ruler no more that completely negates your opponent's entire field. Next up, Axis Cold Talker to basically go for game. This thing actually came up a few times where during my turn, when it's my turn to counterattack, I would actually link into Axis Cold Talker, use this effect to banish maybe up to 2 link monsters with different attributes in my graveyard, and then pop up to 2 cards my opponent controls. One thing I've noticed about Axis Cold, you don't just have to pay cost from the graveyard. You can actually banish itself from the field to pop something as well. That's actually perfectly legal. So even if your opponent has Necro Valley on the field, you can summon Axis Cold Talker and say, Axis Cold Talker effect, I'm going to banish itself from the field and pop one of your cards. And the best part about Axis Cold Talker, your opponent can't respond to it. They cannot say, oh, wait, I'm going to chain the card you're trying to pop. They cannot do that. Once you declare its effect, that's it. Your opponent is completely at your mercy. And next up, one Appaloosa, Bow of the Goddess. This thing, depending on how many monsters you use to link summon it, it can gain like an 800 attack times the number of monsters you used, and it has that many. It can negate that many times. Its effect also specifies that it's once per chain, but it's not once per turn. So if your opponent activates a monster and you negate it, and then they attempt to activate another monster's effect in a completely separate chain, you can use this to negate it again as well. So yes, Appaloosa, still a very good card. Next up for the Nightmares, we have Nightmare Unicorn and Nightmare Phoenix. Phoenix is like a back row destruction, similar to like a Tornado Dragon, while Unicorn, it doesn't destroy, it shuffles it back to the deck. This thing is really useful for getting rid of cards that say, oh, it cannot be destroyed by card effects. But yeah, too bad. Unicorn doesn't destroy, it shuffles into the deck, so it still outs it regardless. Last 3 cards I ran are 1 IP Masquerena to link summon either turn. And the funny thing is that even though this card is wording says that you have to link summon 1 link monster using materials you control, including this card, you can still use it to go into Underworld Goddess, even though it links away 1 monster your opponent controls. Also, Platinum Gadget, because still, like, it's always good to get an extra summon. For instance, this card makes it so that it's possible to go 1 card, 1 Union Hanger equals full ABC Dragon Buster combo. And the last card I run is 1 Link Karibo, so that if I successfully summon like a 1000x Restrict or a Millenniumize Restrict, instead of going to the end phase and waiting for them to self-destruct due to the effect of Instant Fusion, I link it away along with whatever monster was equipped to it to summon Link Karibo. And this is still not a terrible card. If your opponent attacks you at any point in time, you can actually tribute it, get its effect off, and automatically like turn the attacking opponent's monster's attack points to 0. So this thing still has its uses. Although like compared to maybe 3-4 years ago, I do admit it's not as good. But if you want, you can run Relinquish Anima over this, and it's probably gonna be like it's probably gonna serve a similar purpose. So that covers it for the main and extra deck. Let's start with the side deck. For side deck, I have 2 Nibiru, the Primal Being, for those annoying decks that just keep summoning monsters nonstop, like Punk for 1, and I believe the Sword Soul as well for another. 2 DD Crows. Again, I feel like this format is very heavily graveyard reliant. Like even my deck, ABCs for instance, like I need all 3 of ASL Core, B Buster Drake, and Sea Crush Viper in the graveyard in order to summon Dragon Buster. If your opponent has those 3 monsters in the graveyard, the best thing you can do is use DD Crow to banish one of them. This card is also really good against Branded Despia. I would say this card, objectively, anything that Ghost Bell can do, DD Crow can also do. So if your opponent, let's say they activate Branded in red, targeting one of their monsters to add back to their hand in order to perform a fusion summon, you can use DD Crow immediately, banish their target, and then since they weren't able to add that target back to their hand, the fusion summon doesn't happen. And compared to something like Ghost Bell, for instance, if your opponent has Branded Lost on the field, you can't even use Ghost Bell because the effect of Branded in red involves fusion summoning. While like Ghost Bell, it doesn't negate the effect, it actually tries to negate the activation. So basically, like Branded Lost would negate Ghost Bell, but it doesn't negate DD Crow because DD Crow doesn't explicitly negate any activations. So yes, DD Crow, a good card to counter both something like ABCs in a mirror match or like a Branded Despia deck. Next up, 1 Underworld Banshee and 1 Zombie World. These 2 cards are mainly cited for the Flounder-Reese matchup. Now the Flounder-Reese, they're a Winged Beast archetype. They're mainly a Winged Beast archetype. However, they also involve a lot of tribute summoning similar to Monarchs. Zombie World makes it so that the Flounder-Reese player cannot tribute summon anything except zombies. And since the Flounder-Reese are mostly Winged Beasts, that means basically it stops them from playing for the most part. And Necroworld Banshee, because it's a quick effect, you can banish it from the field or graveyard and automatically activate Zombie World to basically stop a Flounder-Reese player. Next up, as the before alluded, Dark Ruler No More, I run 2 in my side deck. And also 1 Harpy Feather Duster to deal with those annoying Mystic Mine or back row decks. And that's it for the spell cards. Finally, we have 3-dimensional barriers. These actually came really in handy against decks like Sword Soul because I would just flip one of these, declare Synchro, and that for the most part, it just ends their turn or severely limits what they can and cannot do. But however, this is mainly a going first card. If you're going second, on the other hand, you would be siding in 3 copies of Evenly Matched. Yeah, Evenly Matched, I wasn't able to get it as often this particular event but I was able to pull it off once, but I only managed to get a 2-for-1 out of it. But I would still say like evenly matched just for the go second, just for the ghost times when you go second. And this particular event, usually if your opponent won the die roll, I would say like 99% of the time they will choose to go first and make you go second. So let's say you won game 1 and then in game 2 you're siding. I would say just side evenly matched in, and then like when your opponent says I'm going to choose to go first, that's basically how you know that you made the right decision siding in evenly matched, essentially. Because now if you open evenly matched as your 6th card, basically that's and maybe if you open another Dark Ruler No More as well, you can play the Dark Ruler No More, they can't negate with any of their monsters, enter battle phase and drop evenly matched, and now they're completely, that's completely blows out their entire field altogether. So that's it for my ABC deck. Let me know what you guys think of my deck build. Is there any card or tech choice you guys feel like I should have added in? Let me know in the comment section below, and thanks for watching as always.